So good to see so many folks here on time. Those of you who have your screens on, it's great to see your faces, your backgrounds, lots of studios today. Those of you who don't have your screens on, we're still happy to have you here. I'm going to jump in. I know we have some more folks joining us. Hi, Anna. Good to see you. Dr. Anna Marley here with us. I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to hear from you all today, so I'm just going to jump on in. Welcome everyone to another Art at Noon program. Today is entitled Skin in the Game. And for anyone who's new here, I'm Abby King, the Assistant Director of Adult Programs. And I want to start today by respectfully acknowledging that I, along with our institution and many of our attendees, are speaking to you from the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, whose presence and resilience in Pennsylvania continues to this day. I want to take this opportunity to honor the original caretakers of the land and recognize the histories that have brought our institution and ourselves here. I also want to thank the folks that help make programs like this happen. Fall's Art at Noon lectures are supported by the Barron family in memory of Rose Susan Horshon Barron, a former docent at the Academy and a great supporter of its education programs. So thank you all so much for your continued and ongoing support for this program. I'm going to hand things over to a special guest to introduce Jodi in just a moment. But I want to mention a few things. We are recording today's event. It will be on PAFA's YouTube channel. We'll drop a link to that in the chat momentarily. And we will try to have questions, a time for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to drop things in the chat as we go, thoughts, resources. We'd love to hear from you. I know we have some scholars, some artists on the call, so know that we will have time at the end to address those things. I'm so excited that this is one of our first projects around the Joan Semmel Skin in the Game exhibition. I have to mention that the show is now on view and you can reserve your ticket to see it in person. So if you're in Philadelphia or planning a trip, I just got to see the work and it's fantastic. So I recommend coming to the museum. We also have other programming coming up related to the show. The next program is Art, Aging, and Joan Semmel with Jodi Throckmorton and scholar and catalog writer. I can see you on here, Rachel Middleman, who's joining us today. Rachel, it's great to have you. So if you're interested in learning more about this exciting project after today, know that you can join us for free on November 11th, and link to that also in the chat. So I'm now proud to hand things over to our special guest. We have PAFA's Chief Development Officer and Senior Vice President, Jane Alsop. Jane, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Abby, and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many faces here, so many PAFA friends from in Philadelphia and throughout the country. And before I dive in to thank everyone that made this exhibition possible, I just want to thank all of you for being part of our community, for participating in our public programs, for being members, and just general champions of PAFA. So we are grateful for you, and especially as we head into the holiday season, I just wanted to say a moment of thanks. As you all know, exhibitions like this are years in the making. And they are made possible not only through the hard work of our curators and our staff, but through the generosity of donors. So I won't read all the names today, but know that each and every person and organization that supported this exhibition is so important to PAFA. But specifically, Joan Semmel Skin in the Game is made possible by the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts and the National Endowment for the Arts. Generous support is provided by the Green Family Art Foundation, and additional support is provided by Linda Lee Alter, Jane and Casey Brandt, Howard and Vesna Sachs, and Isabel S. Wilcox. Then we also have folks who generously support our year-round efforts to present interesting exhibitions, large and small, and we know that takes a village as well. So we are grateful to all who support our exhibitions program through gifts to the Fund for Women in Art at PAFA, championing women artists since 1810, and PAFA's annual exhibition fund. So some of those folks include, but are not limited to the ones I'm going to thank now, Bill and Laura Buck, Emily and Mike Kavanaugh, Ralph Satino and Lawrence Taylor, Robert E. Kohler and Francis Colburn Kohler, the Lau Longsworth Charitable Fund, Suyen and Jean Locks, Maggie and Brian Murphy, Sandra Norcross, Donna Ostroff and Carl Capista, PJ Rosenau, the Alice L. Walton Foundation, and Howard Sachs and Vesna Todorovic Sachs. So we are grateful for each and every one of you. And if you would like to learn more about supporting exhibitions or anything at PAFA, my door is always open. So I'd love to talk to you. And now I'd love to hand it over to Jodi Throckmorton and say a few brief words about Jodi. I think you all know how much Jodi has contributed to the world of contemporary art and to furthering the conversation about artists and artists of all kinds at PAFA. So let me give you her brief bio. She is our curator of contemporary art and joined PAFA in the fall of 2014. As PAFA's contemporary curator, Throckmorton oversees PAFA's contemporary art exhibitions and acquisitions. She came from the Ulrich Museum of Art at Wichita State University, Kansas, where she served as curator of modern and contemporary art. And prior to that, she was the associate curator at the San Jose Museum of Art. So I think we have all enjoyed Jodi's exhibitions through the years. Even prior to my arrival at PAFA, I was a huge fan. So in addition to Joan Semmel's Skin in the Game, some of her recent projects include Taking Space, Contemporary Women Artists and the Politics of Scale, curated with Brittany, Rena Banerjee, Make Me a Summary of the World, Melt, Carve, Forge, Embodied Sculptures by Castles, and many others. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Jodi and encourage those of you who haven't been into the galleries yet to come and see it because it's monumental in person. Thanks so much. And here is Jodi.
Thank you, Jane. I appreciate it. And thank you, Abby, for putting this program together. And thank you all for joining us today. It's really wonderful to be able to share this project with you. Joan Semmel's Skin in the Game has been many years in the making, as Jane mentioned. So it's wonderful to be able to talk with you about it today. The exhibition spans almost 60 years of Joan's practice, of Semmel's practice. And we're talking about work that she began in the 1960s up until things that she was making just last year in 2020, which is really special. It marks her first retrospective exhibition and publication, which I kind of want to say again. It marks her first retrospective exhibition and publication. So I certainly believe that this retrospective is long overdue, and I think many of you in the crowd do as well, I hope. But this exhibition and this presentation is really meant to be an overview of Semmel's work. Dr. Rachel Middleman, who's also on the call, wrote an incredible essay in the catalog that really gives you the expansive view of Joan's life and career. And Dr. Amelia Jones as well wrote a beautiful essay for the catalog. So their work and my essay in the book is meant to I hope inspire future scholarship on Joan's work, because every work I talk about today and every series that I talk about today deserves much deeper consideration. And I want to begin with the title work of the show. When I began work on this exhibition some 4 or 5 years ago, one of the things that I knew the most was her early work, more of the early erotic series and sex paintings, but also her most recent work. So the work that she was making, in 2017 or whatever it was. And I started to think about what it meant to do a retrospective of an artist when they are still very active in the studio. And it happens all the time, certainly in the art world and museums. But it was very important to me that we not historicize Joan Semmel's work before it's over, frankly, because she is still in her studio, perhaps even today, making incredible work. Including this painting, which at 288 inches wide and 96 inches tall is her largest work yet. It's a 4-panel painting that really must be seen in the gallery. So I will hope that you all come to visit, because the color and the texture, as well as the scale of the paintings, creates a really incredible experience. But one of the things that I started to think about is that I really wanted to root this retrospective in the new work. So when you come to PAFA to visit the show, you'll notice that in the exterior space of the gallery, it's all recent work by Joan. And as you go in, Skin in the Game, this painting connects what's happening in the early years of Joan's career with what's happening in the later years of Joan's career. There's many things that we'll talk about as we go through about how I see the work coming in a bit of a circle. A lot of the things that she's coming back to in terms of color, line, even in some cases poses and movement, are present in this new work and have been present before in her past work. The exhibition does begin in the mid-60s, late 60s with some work she did in abstract painting. So like many artists of her generation coming up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, Joan began her career painting in an abstract expressionist style. So she early in her career went to Spain as part of her, it's documented in the essay, as part of her husband got a job in Spain and she moved there with her family, but she was able to achieve a quite successful career working in this abstract expressionist mode. And you'll see that there are things that are present in this work in terms of the color that she's using. Of course, it's non-representational in the abstract painting, but you'll see how that continues through in works that she's making about her own body, but also the texture and frankly, the joy and the exuberance that she finds in painting, and also something that is almost intuitive in its practice. But an important moment that eventually, when she returned to New York City in the early 70s, one of the things that she was struck by was the amount of images of nude women that she was seeing, the sort of sexualized, objectified images of women that she was seeing in the culture all over New York City. I mean, I'm not sure if any of you have seen images of Times Square at that moment, but it was a very different place then than it is now. So Joan, in a moment when the feminist artist movement was really burgeoning, and Joan was certainly a part of that, she started to think about how without sexual agency, women would never really achieve independence. The sexuality part is an important part of women's liberation, in fact. And so she started working with couples during sessions where couples had sex and making these, what I think are incredibly beautiful drawings. They're actually not in the show. They're in the catalog, and I'm showing them to you here today. But I hope that you can see for me, what are very incredibly beautiful gestural lines. These are quick drawings done with marker in the middle of these quite, I would imagine, intense sessions of people having sex. But what also comes through, if you step back and just take a long look at them, is the abstraction and the motion that's still present in the work. A few times we've, through the years, I've talked about how Joan made a switch from abstract work to figurative work, but going against my previous arguments, I would say that there's been no switch. I think the abstraction and the figuration, and Joan says this as well, has always been in the work. Both sort of this tension and balance between the two, that as we continue to look at her paintings going forward, I hope that you all will see as well. So the sessions, those early sessions with these beautiful sketches led to these paintings, which are certainly still abstract in nature. Again, if you step back and sort of take yourself away from the content of the painting and look at the different forms and that she's making and the lines and the non-representational color, you can easily lose yourself in the abstraction of the work. It was a really interesting moment for feminism and for this switch, because we still see that abstraction playing out. This is an area that's of particular interest to me for various reasons. But there were quite a few women artists at the time who went from making abstract work and had very successful careers as abstract expressionist artists, who made a switch into work that was more figurative or more directly about what some would say is a women's subject matter. So work that ultimately led into the feminist art movement. Joan Brown, a West Coast artist, is an example of that. She was very successful with her abstract work and turned to making paintings about her personal life. This is a painting of her son Noel at Christmas. as well as someone like Lucida Hurtado, who began also in California, back and forth, but partially in California, with an more geometric sort of abstract style, but did transition to making work about, among other things, her own body and self-portraits, in fact, looking down at her own body. As well as, Carolee Schneemann, who started out as a painter, and like many feminist artists, stepped away from painting to do more performance work or photography work about the body. But what's interesting is that Carolee's work, for example, this piece Up and Including Her Limits, is all about pushing against that that lineage of abstract expressionisms that's certainly associated with men. So thinking about how these artists were turning at that moment to this type of work at a time when I think it's important to note that many feminist artists did turn away from painting. There are certainly some that stayed with it, wanting to subvert the medium, subvert the patriarchal history of painting, using the medium itself. But there were a whole host of others that you see in the feminist art movement, like Schneemann, for example, who turned to video or other modes of working. In some cases, because they felt like they needed to chart a new territory outside of painting for this subject matter. I think it's also worth pointing out, especially in this series, this is a series that Joan did called the Erotic Series, that not many feminist artists were painting so directly about sex. In fact, it was a bit taboo, or perhaps taboo is not the wrong word, but not accepted as a feminist to paint about heterosexual sex in this way, in a way that Joan describes as exuberant, as wanting to connect you with the ecstatic sexual experience. And in this case, Joan had turned from making those beautiful quick sketches during the sessions of couples having sex to taking photographs. So we start to see a more photorealistic depictions of the bodies, and yet they're a wonderful bright orange skin and a Martian green skin. So again, going back to that non-representational color, you'll also notice that there's no background description. There's no scene carved out to give you a sense of what's happening in the background, or to help or to fill in any sort of narrative forms of this sexual story. The focus is on the act. But also, as we talk about pornography and photography, it's interesting how she's at once co-opting the language to talk about female sexual experience, but also changing the angles and what she's pointing the viewer to in this painting versus what's happening in more commercial pornography, especially at that time. From the sex sessions, Joan started to make work thinking more about intimacy, and in this case, intimacy autonomy. As she was thinking about sexual liberation and how sexuality and how that should be part of women's liberation, she was also thinking about that idea of partnership and the idea of an intimacy. You see those two hands are just almost touching, which is something that she continues to do beautifully throughout her work, is imply the idea of touch. But as the title says, there's an intimacy, but there's also autonomy, as in that's the relationship, that's the balanced relationship that we should be searching for. So looking at these two figures, and in this case, this is one of the first times that Semmel actually used herself in the work and looked down with the camera. And Rachel Middleman talks about this really quite wonderfully in her essay. But this is one of the few times until much later in the work where Joan was taking two separate photographs and combining them in one painting. You have two different directions and perspectives in the piece, but she was beginning to combine this photography and, importantly, using herself in the work, which led to a series that she began in the 1970s, her self-image series, which she continues to today. This is a piece called Me Without Mirrors, which is absolutely spectacular in person. I cannot convey to you how beautiful the light cascades on the top of the knee and across her chest here. It's a beautiful painting in person, which I do hope you'll see. But thinking about what it means to show yourself, to paint yourself, to think about yourself without mediation, right? Me without mirrors. This is Joan looking down at herself and painting her body, painting herself. So it's a moment of where Joan is thinking certainly about the images that she sees of women in popular culture, and frankly, the images that we continue to see of women in popular culture, but also thinking about what happens in art history, which she'll continue to address throughout her career. But you know, there's a lot of really productive discussion, I think, happening and has happened over the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, and maybe even beyond that, but about that relationship between artist and model and that power dynamic and ideas of consent, you know, how a model consents for their image to be used, and those types of issues that are revealed through the history of painting. And one of the things is that Joan really, you know, who better to give consent to model than yourself? And who better to give consent to use your body than yourself? Which, though Joan may not have thought about this like this in the 1970s, I think that's what we see with a lot of what's happening on the internet, with people sharing images of themselves, for example, or even what we're seeing of sex workers taking advantage of, or being able to control the images of their own body and the videos of their own body. Now, I am by no means making a comparison between that type of work and what Joan's doing, but I hope that you can see how in 1974, especially, and even today, that's a revolutionary gesture, and something that's done by Joan with a lot of thought. It's almost a going deep into the self, to reveal and to try to reveal a universal idea of the self, that I think is something that really carries forward into today. And this work, which I apologize, the slide's a little, the images, I wanted to get the image as big as I could because it's a big impact painting. This is an incredibly important piece that was an absolute joy to bring into the exhibition, because it is a masterpiece of Joan's. A piece called Mythologies in Me from 1976. And it has a wonderful story to it. Joan was working with Werner Heller in the 70s. And I would like to point out, to go back a minute, that she didn't find any galleries to show those erotic series paintings. So in true feminist form of making your own way, Joan rented her own gallery and showed those paintings. So when she did get commercial representation by Werner Heller, they discussed doing a political show, but explained to Joan that you know, well, your work's not really political, so how could that fit into the show? So I believe she said, I'll paint you a diagram. And that's exactly what she did. So what you see is a self-image of Joan in the middle panel, with on the left an image from a Playboy centerfold, and on the right, of course, Joan's painted version of William de Kooning, one of William de Kooning's women. So she has sandwiched herself and an image of herself directly between these these other forces in culture. You've got the sexy Playboy centerfold and the way the male gaze inhabits that image. But then you also have the art historical version of that, and thinking about the discussion about how people say that de Kooning painted these women very violently, and thinking about how women are portrayed in art history. So you've got the biggies, you've got the larger culture, and you've got art history, and she's hit from every side of it. And I will point out, I hope that you can see in this image that there are collage items. There is on the nipple of the de Kooning, it's actually a baby bottle nipple, and there's collage elements as well on, you know, the nylons of the woman in the Playboy centerfold, for example. There's a few times, actually there's only one time in the show where I've shown any of Joan's photography. which is not a part of her work that she frequently shows. She certainly, it's the paintings that are the final product and are the work that she wants to show. But we can't help but be interested in the photography and how that plays out within the work, and certainly the relationship between photography and painting, which continues to affect to play into her work today. This is one such case, and I included one drawing in my presentation to you today, where she has taken photographs from her self-image series. If you look sort of on the middle, in the center left there, that's a photograph that she's collaged onto a pastel drawing that she's made from these self-images. So seeing how she's turning a corner and coming back a bit to these gestures, or perhaps again, going against my earlier argument again, is saying not going back, but how that gestural line continues to be there and is always there, that sense of action and looseness that makes her really an incredible artist. One of the amazing things that's been happening as I go through the show is how many series of Joan's work that people are not familiar with. And there's quite a bit in the 1980s. I've brought you a few examples here to show you. One is the Gym series that she did in the mid 80s. So, I like to say that this is the moment of, buns of steel and all those, I don't know, sweating to the oldies or whatever it is, moments of being in the gym. And so Joan went into a gym in Soho, asked permission to photograph the people, working out as they go. And this led her to look deeply at mirrors again and what's happening in these spaces. So she quickly moved from the gym into a more private space, as she is wont to do, of the changing room. So she started to take photographs of women, putting their makeup on, showering, in this case, weighing themselves, doing very typical activities of any person that you may do in a locker room after a workout. There was a wonderful quote from a Times critic that I thought was very revealing at the time. This was in an exhibition in the late 1980s, where they said, well, these women are not presented in an idealized fashion. I guess that's progress in terms of the feminist art movement, which certainly made me roll my eyes at the time. It's because that's exactly the point of the work, right? Is to show women as they truly are, to show people as they truly are in these moments, especially in such a private space, frankly, and a space that perhaps my brain was inhabited by the idea of locker room talk and things of that nature, but a space of even fantasy and male fantasy, to present it so matter-of-factly, I think is quite revolutionary. And again, when you think about the art historical genre of the bathing scenes, for example, this is all playing out in this changing room, picture. And not to mention the mirrors. So what you may look at and think there are 6 figures, there's actually 3, because what you're looking at is a lot of mirror reflections back and forth. And that's incredibly important, because whereas she was painting herself without mirrors in the 70s, she began to see herself again in the mirrors in these locker rooms in conjunction with these other women. So that led to into work again about herself and her own body, but also I would argue that the changing room scene also allowed her to see herself in a different way and her body in a different way as a woman that is aging. So thinking about how we go from those early self-images into what she'll make of her more mature body later. And this is, and I want to correct my date on that. It's actually 1973/1992, because these are paintings that Joan picked up, sex paintings erotic series paintings, excuse me, that she had made in the 1970s. They had not sold. If there are many artists in the call, I'm sure we've all had our moments where you've picked up old work and thought, well, these are never going to go anywhere. I'm going to make something of them. So this series was a revelation to me when I first saw the work. She's taken the erotic series painting, but started to paint imagery from the Locker Room series on top. In this case, you have the wonderful image of the flash. It's called Flash. So that camera, which had before become simply a tool to make the work, and it certainly remains a tool to make the work, it does start to pop up in the actual paintings as part of the composition and part of her message. So you have these female figures from the Locker Room series, even Joan herself, dancing in washes over this overlaid. The paintings are called overlays, overlaid over these erotic series paintings. So there's a back and forth there that I think is quite interesting about sexuality in women's bodies, and that Joan is really wonderfully playing with. And there are 3 of those in the show. I could not resist. I included 3 because I hope that they'll be a revelation to everyone else as much as they are to me. From this moment on, the work, we see the camera coming in, we see a more photorealistic style coming back into the work, and we see the tools that Joan uses, the camera, but also the mirror. You notice that wonderful slip that happens where you see the edge of the mirror. And so you have a doubling effect that happens at the top of the canvas, where she's really bringing in those tools of her making. And of course, this is a wonderfully, to me, confrontational painting, because if you're standing right in front of it, it really makes you feel that she is pointing that camera right back at you, which I think is part of it. But if we dig a little deeper into the painting, you start to think that actually it's a completely self-referential relationship, because she's actually facing a mirror and looking back at herself in this photograph. In the background, you have a mannequin, and just before this series, Joan did a whole series of works on mannequins, thinking about the idealized forms that they take and what that means also for women's bodies. So this is a in some ways deeply symbolic painting as we start to dive into what she's doing, and also that crossed leg that kind of blocks you from further further gazing at her body, which is a shift from what she had been doing in the past with the self-images. And of course, this piece, a work called Disappearing. At this time, the self-images are fully back, and she's exploring what that means now as a woman with an aging body. And so not only exploring or so literally sort of exploring the body as an aging sort of specimen, but thinking about the beauty in that, I would argue. I think these paintings are incredibly beautiful, but also coming back to playing with really being experimental with paint. The washes come in that maybe we saw in the overlay series, one could speculate. And so you get this beautiful blurring effect in this painting, for example, called Disappearing. Which to me is a quite, in one word, it's a quite poetic title, because one does think about the very incorrect leap that's made in terms of women. They say that women disappear after they reach a certain age, or frankly, after they reach a certain age past sexual viability. And I think by Joan asserting this image is disappearing, she's actually very much proving that she's not disappearing. And a broader comment on women in culture as well, that's an incorrect statement. And thinking about Joan's continued even beyond 2006. I mean, she's had another over 15 years of painting beyond this time, and seen a really renewed interest in her painting as well. And that includes this piece, Transition, which it's something to see on the wall at 90 inches. I want you to really imagine that. You know, she has started to use digital photography by this time, and you can see how the layering and the transparency and the movement really becomes a part of what she's doing. So capturing many poses via camera, but playing with that idea of layering and sort of a tumbling effect of the body that this shows, as well as she says in her titles, it's a transitions. And I want to end in this little section of the presentation before I do something that will give me a little bit of joy. What is with these pieces called Flesh Ground. This is Flesh Ground, and then a study for Flesh Ground, where this is where we really start to see that non-representational color come back. If you remember the Martian green that popped up in Indian Erotic, which is PAFA's painting, here it is popping up in her own body here, as well as the outline that's being traced. So the importance of that line is popping back up in the paintings and coming back for full circle, which is what I would like to just spend a few minutes doing, because it's something that I had hoped would come out in the exhibition, and I think did. But I think that this presentation is a moment where we could put a few things side by side, recent and earlier, to sort of see where we've been and make those connections. So one of the very recent pieces, this was done in 2020, is called Couch Diptych. I would argue one of a very different painting than what we'd seen even in the last 5 or 6 years. That black is very stark. You know, one of the things, I was having a recent conversation with someone in the gallery that you know, there's a lot of beauty in this work, and but yet it's much more stark and almost harsh than the other pieces in the show. But what's happening is that, again, the work's getting very loose. If you see that yellow line, those lines are popping back up from her earlier abstract work, or even the early sex painting work. And so I wanted to just bring this together to show you, when you're in the galleries, and I hope you will look very closely at just, you know, take a certain passage of a painting, which I know art historians and maybe curators love to do too. But to think about how these elements are broken down into really beautiful passages, as I think of them, but also how they connect and show that, you know, it's exactly as Joan says, you know, the abstraction never went away from the work, and that joy of painting and playing with the texture and washes of painting is here in a painting from 2020 on the right, and certainly in an earlier abstract painting from 1968. And this is an installation shot from the exhibition that was a happy accident to me, but I hope that when you walk through the gallery, you'll turn around and try to find this viewpoint, because it was a moment of enlightenment for me with the work. You see Skin in the Game in the background on the left, and then an untitled work from 1971 from her erotic series. So the more loose gestural sex paintings coming from those gestural drawings of sex sessions in the front. So certainly we've got a palette that's returning these bright, luminous colors that absolutely jump off the canvas when you're in person, but also that yellow line that you see curving around the buttocks, for example, in the erotic series sex painting, excuse me, is also in Sex in the Game, as well as the movement that she's getting with the couple in the erotic series painting, but with her own body and Skin in the Game. And finally, I just wanted to hit on 2 more pieces. One is a very special loan from the Museum of Modern Art that's in the exhibition, done in 1978, and then Red Hand, which from 2020, which is the cover of the catalog as well. But thinking about, if you well, I hope you do a lot and think a lot when you go through the exhibition, but one of the things that you could notice, please, is her hand and what she does to convey touch, and to convey, even one would argue, the hand of the artist, that red hand, but how she, I believe, connects us to her body, to ideas of touch, to ideas of physicality, through painting, but also in the placements of her hands in various works. And I did want to end with an image of the catalog, certainly as a plug. It's available in the gift store, but also frankly to thank Dr. Rachel Middleman and Dr. Amelia Jones, who contributed wonderful essays to the publication, which I hope, as I said, will be just the beginning of many, many years of scholarship on Joan's work, because there's much to be done. And I'm happy to take any questions. I'm going to unshare, going to take us off screen share, and you're welcome to put them in the chat. You're welcome to raise your hand if I can see you. However you want to get our attention, we'd love to hear your questions. Maybe there are a few in the chat. Oh, thank you, Abby. Abby put the catalog link in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Jodi, so much. You're getting applause from some of your colleagues, and I think I see a hand from Anna already. Anna, go ahead.
Hi, Jodi. I had a question that struck me as I was listening to your talk that I haven't asked you, but I thought I'll get us going. And I was struck by the sort of tumbling painting, and also thinking about Emma Amos's work that's up at the PMA right now, and the Falling series, and just thinking of them as both feminist artists, and they're both on view in Philadelphia right now. And, I just wondered if what kind of connections you might make or not make between that kind of series.
Absolutely. Well, I have to admit, I know of the Falling series, Emma Amos' work. I have to admit that I don't know it in depth, right? But I'm really glad you brought up that connection, because I'm hoping that's a connection that more people make. We're very happy to have Jasper Johns in Philadelphia, of course, but how absolutely incredible is it to have two feminist artists, Emma Amos and Joan Semmel, who knew each other, and who work together on various feminist initiatives in the feminist art movement. How incredible it is to have both of their work here on display. And I think it's a special moment to see how their work, yes, both connects, but also diverges, in the way that they're two different people with very different identities. But I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm not sure I can make a connection with the Falling series. But I'd welcome if anyone else has any thoughts about it, to please jump in. But I'm glad you brought that up, because I hope that more people make that connection.
Thank you, Anna. I wonder, Jodi, and you can tell me if you don't want to answer this, but I've just thought of this while I was talking to you about your relationship, or how you came to Semmel's work, because I think it's so important that this is this is the first museum retrospective of her work, but I'm just curious how you kind of came across Semmel in your curatorial journey.
Yeah, it felt like, well, of course, Joan Semmel is in the art history books, as she should be, with the feminist art movement. So I think that was my first moment, probably way back in undergraduate, and learning about the work and loving the work, but also wanting to know more about it. But there a few things I think came together. Bob Cozzolino was at PAFA when I started, and Joan was a favorite artist of both of us, frankly. So we immediately started scheming about how to get a work into the collection, which we did. Indian Erotic is the piece that PAFA purchased some years ago. And so that was happening. And then frankly, I'm not sure that I even realized at the time that she hadn't had a retrospective yet. And that seems to be the response that I get from a lot of people when I say, this is her first retrospective. There's a shock, like, well, surely that's been done. So that was in my mind, is how does this incredibly important artist, how hasn't that been that consideration of her work? I also thought, and I've said this a couple times, and I think it's okay to say this publicly, that in some ways it's the most PAFA show I've ever done at PAFA, because it's about figurative painting, and it's all about the body. It's all about the love of paint. So I kept thinking, wow, PAFA is the perfect place for this show, especially with the work that we've been doing on women artists and collecting women artists for the institution. But then also, and I hope that we will eventually do a panel on this, is being in younger artist studios. Duran Langberg is an example of that. being in his studio and hearing how inspired he was by her work. So thinking about a whole generation of younger feminist younger queer painters that were really interested in her work. I think all those things started to happen in the months. And then, with the help of Alexander Gray Gallery and his team, we were able to make it happen.
Thanks, Jodi.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. And I think, let's see. We have, yes, Philip commented, I think an art historical precedent for Joan's work would be Colvit's close-up self-portraits. Absolutely. And there is certainly a lineage in art history as we go deeper that certainly precedes Joan's use of the self-portraits. And oh, well, this is a great, I think not unrelated question. How do you think Semmel's radical foreshortening of figures contributes to her expressive content? Oh, well, I think specifically with, well, both, with the erotic series, and the erotic series is the more photo realist of the two sex series, but also with the self images. I think that it puts you in the middle of the action, right? Whether that's putting you right in place of her body, or putting you in this sexual scene. That's one of the very basic ways that I think that work does that. It brings you right in, and that's what she did, especially in the early work. You see that shifting in images like Centered, which is the image with her leg to the side and the camera. But there's a way that she has of propping and of foreshortening that brings you right in, and the scale. I mean, that's something you can't convey in a presentation, but the scale of these works does exactly the same.
Jodi, we have a wonderful comment from one of our frequent attendees from Juneau, saying that they saw the work in person this past weekend and mentioned how Joan was also documenting how female artists work by including the camera. I wonder if you could speak to that, because for me, it's like noticing the types of cameras and the change, and knowing that she's working in digital now. You can see this moment of history passing.
Interesting. So I just want to make sure I understand. So is it talking, are you saying, Juno, that documenting how painters, for example, work with the camera? Is that, I'm gonna go with maybe that's it. Like, so sort of documenting the tools behind the work. Oh, there you are. Do you mind saying more?
Hi. Yeah. As a photographer, it was, I loved seeing the cameras itself, right? So you have the Nikon, you have what I think was an Instamatic, which was just kind of funny to me. But just being able to see how she worked, right? So she incorporated that. She didn't have to incorporate the camera. Of course, that's part of her statement, in that you're documenting yourself and you're therefore in some way taking back that gaze, right? And
right.
Any other thing you could add to that. But you also get to look at this artist and how she worked, so that was just a slice of her process. So I just loved that.
Yeah, I actually really love the way that you're thinking about that, because that's also similar to the mirrors, right? The mirrors, she's very sort of forthcoming with the tools that she's using to make these images. And if you think about how we talk about mediated imagery, for example, if you think about things that were happening in the art world in the 90s, for example, mediated imagery, it's almost like she's being clear about what's mediating her imagery. That even between even images of yourself that you're painting of yourself, she's using tools of mediation, because you could argue that that's the camera. I think that one day there's absolutely an essay in there somewhere, to go deeper into that aspect of her work. Yeah. Thank you. This is a great question from Larry. In regard to figurative taboo busting imagery, Semmel is perhaps the forerunner to Betty Tompkins on the one hand and Eric Fischel on the other. I love that question. We do have a work by Betty in the collection, which I'm really happy for, and I hope that we can get on view one day. You know, I actually think that she and Betty were almost Betty's like one generation, I guess you would say post Semmel. But Betty was using images directly from pornography. But I think she certainly was part of that group of feminist artists that were their work was looked down upon because they were using these sexual imagery to talk about sex, and not necessarily always critiquing the idea that of sex and saying it shouldn't be part of art, right? And then you mentioned Eric Fischel, which I thought long about. Actually, my first show before I was at PAFA that came to PAFA was a show on Eric Fischel's work that I curated with Harry Philbrick. And it was one of the conversations that I actually had with Eric while I was working on the show, because his relationship to the feminist art movement is quite interesting. He gives full respect to Semmel and the influence that she had on his work. I think the question becomes, we should all think about art historically and art world wise. Why did Eric Fischel and David Sally, why are they known for bringing back figurative painting and expressionism in the 80s, when it's very clear that Joan and many other feminist artists, female artists, were making work about the body, and making psychologically interesting work about the body. So I think that's a question. That's something that Eric acknowledges too, and also the fact that he was at Cal Arts, when the feminist art movement was in full swing. So thinking about how feminism actually had an effect on his painting. So I think that's an excellent question, and I have to tell the story. I know many of you have heard it all the time, but when I did the Eric Fischel exhibition at the San Jose Museum of Art, we had recent paintings in the show of older bodies that he had been painting on the beach, and he just paints skin beautifully. Like, they're just amazing paintings. But one of the comments we got from a visitor was, "I don't want to come to a museum and see old naked bodies like mine." And that just hit me. And I think that's might be some of what if people are ever uncomfortable about Joan's work, I think that when we see these images of bodies, you can't help but think about yourself and your own aging body, perhaps. So it's the like mine that I think is really important. But I think the Fischel connection is quite important. So thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions or comments? If anyone wants to share anything, I'd be happy to.
Andrea asks, what's next?
What's
I'm not sure if that means for you, Jodi, or for Joan, or.
Well, Joan is continuing to make work. So I would imagine soon we'll see yet another show. She had a show open this summer at Alex Gray. Next for PAFA, the next big show is Anna's show on American artists, which is going to be exciting. I'll work from the collection from, I'm going to get this wrong, but up till about 1976, I believe. Anna, is that correct?
1776 to 1976. So I am rounding up some of the suspects from the historic landmark building, and they will be going into where Joan Semmel is now. And actually, you wouldn't think they would have similar themes, but there is a lot of figuration, history of portraiture, and also reevaluations of portraiture in the 1970s, including an amazing purchase that Jodi made of Joan Brown's work. which has deep resonances with the artist in his museum, I think. So that will be that show. And then one of the reasons I'm working on that show is because Jodi has a really exciting project coming up in spring of 23, which Jodi, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, we're planning a takeover of sorts of the historic landmark building with contemporary art, all around one theme related to the Rising Sun Chair at Independence Hall, which is related to the question that Benjamin Franklin asked: is the sun rising or setting on our country? So we've invited, we're working with the African American Museum in Philadelphia. They'll also be, we're co-curating the project with them, and we'll be allowing 12 artists, maybe more, sort of respond to that idea. So big show.
And then after that, our curator of 20th century art, Brittany Webb, is working on an amazing John Roden retrospective, which I'm sure you have heard a little bit about, because I believe that Brittany and our archivist Wang have talked about the Roden Archive project, and we're working on the major exhibition for that. So those are just our really big projects. And of course we have a lot of other things in the hopper.
And Sarah asked if there's going to be any programs that Joan will participate in, and that answer is yes. We're working on a conversation with Joan. You know, I think you know, whether it'll happen before the end of December or before the end of the year or early in the new year. No, we'll see. But yes,
And
look forward to that.
Tell us how long the exhibition is up for, and maybe what days we're open to the public, because
yes,
we want people to come.
We're open Thursdays through Sundays, and the exhibition is open through the beginning of April. So, you know, come back many times. And thank you all.
Place to end it. I want to thank Jodi. Number one, thank you so much for sharing your amazing scholarship. This exhibition is fantastic. I second that when I say come see it in person, make the trip. The works are so vibrant. So, and thank you all of you for joining us for another Art at Noon. We hope to see you in person or on another call like this. And until then, stay safe, everybody.
Take care. Thank you.